Imagine a love so powerful it was classified as a disease, a form of madness, a passion so intense. The only prescribed cure was the shame of the public square or the finality of the executioner's axe. We journey back to a time when falling in love wasn't a right, it was a rebellion, an act of treason against your family, your class, and even your God. We're not talking about abstract ideas. We're talking about real people with names etched in the cold, unforgiving ink of medieval court records. Our journey begins not in a gilded castle, but on a muddy village road in 13th century England. The records named them Robert and Alice. He was a stonemason, his hands callous from shaping the very church that would condemn him. She was a baker's daughter, promised since she was a child to a merchant she had never loved. Their crime was simple, human, and eternal. They were discovered in a hayloft, not by a jealous fiancé, but by the village priest making his rounds. The punishment that followed was not a quiet scolding. It was medieval theater, a spectacle of social control. They were stripped of their undergarments, their hands bound to the back of a wooden cart, whipped through the cobbled streets, from the doors of the church that promised salvation to the heart of the village square that now offered only humiliation. Every lash was a lesson. Every jeer from the crowd was a nail in the coffin. The sentence was designed not just to cause pain, but to inflict a deeper wound, to make their love a public horror story, a living, breathing warning to anyone else whose heart dared to stray from the path of duty. What kind of world builds such brutal, systematic walls around the human heart? And more importantly, what kind of love could possibly be worth that price? We uncover the incredible, forgotten histories of the medieval rebels who looked at a world that screamed, "You cannot love," and with breathtaking, world-changing courage, whispered back, "Watch us." To truly understand their rebellion, you first have to understand the prison. It wasn't a prison of stone and iron, but one of ideas more powerful and inescapable than any castle wall. Medieval society was built on a rigid, unshakable concept they called the Great Chain of Being. Imagine a divine ladder, stretching from the mud to the heavens. At the very top, of course, was God. Below him, the archangels and angels. Then came the Pope, then kings and the high nobility, dukes and earls. Below them, knights and lesser nobles. Then wealthy merchants, skilled artisans, and finally, taking up the vast bottom rungs, the ocean of peasants and serfs who made up over 90% of the population. This wasn't a social theory. It was considered a law of nature, as real as gravity. Your rung on that ladder was decided the moment you were born, decreed by God himself. To try and climb it, or worse, to reach down, wasn't just socially awkward. It was a cosmic crime. It was spitting in the face of divine order. And your heart, your love, it wasn't yours to give. It was a piece of family property, a chess piece to be moved on the great board of survival and ambition. For the vast majority of people, love was a dangerous luxury they simply couldn't afford. For those who dared to try, there were 3 great walls enclosing them, each one higher and more formidable than the last. First, and most visible, was a wall of class. For a peasant girl to fall in love with a young lord wasn't a fairy tale waiting to happen. It was a potential catastrophe. Sumptuary laws dictated not only what you could wear based on your class, but implicitly, who you could be. Love that crossed these lines was seen as a contaminant. We uncover the incredible, forgotten histories of the medieval rebels who looked at a world that screamed, "You cannot love," and with breathtaking, world-changing courage, whispered back. To truly understand their rebellion, you first have to understand the prison. It wasn't a prison of stone and iron, but one of ideas more powerful and inescapable than any castle wall. Medieval society was built on a rigid, unshakable concept they called the Great Chain of Being. Imagine a divine ladder, stretching from the mud to the heavens. At the very top, of course, the archangels and angels, then kings and the high nobility. Below them, knights and lesser nobles. Then wealthy merchants, skilled artisans, and finally, taking up the vast bottom rungs, the ocean of peasants and serfs who made up over 90% of the population. This wasn't a social theory. It was considered a law of nature, as real as gravity. Your rung on that ladder was decided the moment you were born, decreed by God himself. To try and climb it, or worse, to reach down, wasn't just socially awkward. It was a cosmic crime. It was spitting in the face of divine order. It wasn't yours to give. It was a piece of family property, a chess piece to be moved on the great board of survival and ambition. For the vast majority of people, love was a dangerous luxury they simply couldn't afford. For those who dared to try, there were three great walls enclosing them, each one higher and more formidable than the last. First, and most visible, for a peasant girl to fall in love with a young lord wasn't a fairy tale waiting to happen. It was a potential catastrophe. Sumptuary laws dictated not only what you could wear based on your class, but implicitly, love that crossed these lines was seen as a contamination of noble blood, a threat to the carefully constructed system of inheritance and power. In 1284, the French knight Jean de Gaulle fell in love with a serf on his estate named Isabelle. A serf was, legally, property. His love for her was akin to loving a piece of livestock in the eyes of his peers. When he attempted to free her and marry her, his family intervened. The court records are chillingly clear. He wasn't just exiled. He was publicly stripped of his knighthood in a ceremony of degradation. His sword was broken over the knee of his own father. His lands were forfeited to the crown, and his entire family was slapped with a ruinous fine for failing to control his unnatural affections. Their love didn't just cost them their future. It destroyed their family's past and present. It was an annihilation. Next, the wall of the church. In medieval Europe, the Catholic Church was the single unifying power and the ultimate moral authority, all rolled into one. Its laws were God's laws. The church's ideal for its most spiritual members, priests, monks, and nuns, was total celibacy. This created an ideal that permeated all society, that the purest love was love for God, and that earthly passionate love was, at best, a necessary evil for procreation and, at worst, a dangerous distraction. The hugely influential theologian, St. Augustine of Hippo, wrote in the 4th century, but his ideas echoed for 1,000 years. He taught that concupiscence, passionate desire, even between a legally married husband and wife, was a consequence of Adam and Eve's original sin. It was a disordered, chaotic force that distracted the soul from its true purpose. A heart consumed with fiery passion for another person was a heart not fully available to its creator. So your deepest, most profound human connection was framed but as a spiritual liability. But for most people, the highest and most personal wall, in a world without police forces, social security, or public institutions, as we know them, your family was everything, your protection, and your only path to a future. The patriarch of that family, your father, your uncle, the eldest male, held power that was near absolute. A daughter's marriage was his single greatest asset. It could forge an alliance with a powerful neighbor, merge two pieces of valuable farmland, or secure a business partnership that would elevate the entire family's fortunes. A daughter's heart was simply not part of the calculation. Disobedience wasn't treated as teenage rebellion. It was a profound act of betrayal. It could lead to being disinherited, cast out, and erased. The court rolls of Flanders document the case of a young woman named Marie, a weaver, had arranged her marriage to a wealthy merchant 3 times her age. The deal would secure his own business for life. But Marie had fallen in love with a local carpenter, a man of her own age and class, but with no fortune. When she refused the arrangement, her father's reaction was swift and total. He didn't just forbid the union with the carpenter. He took her before a church court and had her legally declared filian alias, a daughter of no one. He legally erased her from the family line. He had her confined to a convent under a vow of perpetual silence. He didn't just take away her love. He took away her name, her voice, and her future. Her crime was choosing a man over a business deal. These were the forces, the walls, that conspired to keep the human heart in chains. They created a world where love was a liability and passion was a crime. But human nature is a stubborn. Something is forbidden, the more desperately and creatively people will fight for it. In the shadows of this rigid control world, lovers weren't just breaking rules. They were inventing a whole new art of rebellion. There's a well-known psychological principle called reactance theory. It states that when our freedoms are restricted, our desire to reassert that freedom intensifies. Tell a child not to touch a hot stove, and their curiosity burns. Tell a medieval lover they cannot have the one their soul craves, and you don't extinguish the flame. You turn it into a forge. Denied the right to speak their love openly, they became masters of the whisper, the coded glance. They became spies in the house of their own lives, developing an entire arsenal of secret communication, a language of the heart so ingenious that it was a form of art in itself. They perfected floriography, the language of flowers. This wasn't just a quaint Victorian custom. Its roots are deep in the medieval period. breathing code book disguised as a garden. A single red tulip, delivered by a trusted servant, wasn't just a flower. It was a declaration of love, a silent scream of passion that could be displayed innocently in a window. Its true meaning a secret shared between only two people. A sprig of lavender signaled devotion and loyalty. But yellow carnation was a stinging message of disdain or rejection, an entire, complex conversation of hope, fear, longing, and arrangement. Carefully chosen bouquet. When flowers weren't private enough, they turned to poetry, embedding secret messages within the verses. The acrostic poem was a favorite tool. A seemingly innocent ode to the beauty of spring, or the valor of a knight, would have a name woven into its very structure. The first letter of each line, read vertically, would spell out a soul or a hidden signature of the heart, invisible to all but the intended reader. They used ciphers and codes that would make a modern-day cryptographer nod in appreciation. The Caesar cipher, where each letter is shifted a certain number of places down the alphabet, but lovers developed their own, more personal codes, where letters were replaced by symbols, could be shared on a scrap of parchment. One lover might write a letter in which only every third word was part of the real message. The rest was meaningless filler to confuse prying eyes, and they created invisible inks. A letter that appeared to be a mundane discussion of household accounts or a theological query to a priest would, when gently heated over a candle flame, reveal searing declarations of love written between the lines. Using common substances like milk, onion juice, or vinegar, they could turn the most boring document into a vessel for their most dangerous secrets. A close-up of a hand carving a small wooden object. They used lovers' tokens. These were everyday objects imbued with extraordinary meaning. A knight might publicly carry his lady's scarf or glove into a tournament, a known symbol of his courtly devotion. But the secrets ran far deeper. A woodcarver might gift his beloved a small wooden bird, with a specific number of feathers carved into its wing to indicate the hour they should meet. A woman might weave a secret pattern into the hem of a tunic, a series of knots, or a colored thread. A code her lover could trace with his fingers, even in a crowded room. These weren't just objects. They were keys, tangible pieces of a hidden, shared world. Some of the most elaborate schemes we know about involve creating entire fictional business relationships. Imagine crafting a series of fake contracts, ledgers, and shipping manifests, all as an elaborate excuse to correspond with your beloved. My dear sir, regarding the overdue shipment of wine from Gascony, could contain coded phrases and numbers detailing plans for a secret rendezvous. The risk was immense, but the cover was perfect. Who would suspect a love affair hidden within the dry, dusty language of medieval commerce? The Paton Letters, a famous collection of family correspondence from 15th century England, contain hints of these codes, with scholars still debating the hidden meanings in notes about sugar loaves and bolts of cloth. This wasn't just theory. In the highest echelons of society, let's return to Lady Margaret de Clare, the wealthy English noblewoman from the 1290s. She was the king's own cousin, a prize on the marriage market, but her heart belonged to Ralph, a humble squire in her household. Their love was a capital offense against the social order. For 2 years, they conducted a secret affair culminating in a secret marriage. Precisely did they manage in a world of no privacy, where the walls had ears and servants' tongues were loose. They built a network of accomplices, a conspiracy of the heart. Margaret had 2 trusted handmaidens who became their messengers, carrying notes hidden in baskets of laundry or loaves of bread. They found a sympathetic friar, a man who believed love was a higher law than inheritance, who agreed to marry them in a tiny, disused chapel miles from her family's estate. Their greatest tool was logistics. They exploited the duties of their station. Margaret would feign a recurring illness that required the country air of a specific, remote manor house. Ralph would be dispatched on an urgent errand for her uncle, an errand that just so happened to take him to that very same manor. For a few precious days, they could live as husband and wife, hidden in plain sight. They turned their lives into a masterpiece of deception and planning, all to protect a love that society deemed impossible. Their story, and thousands of others lost of time, prove that when the doors are locked, love doesn't die. It learns how to pick the lock. It becomes a ghost, a whisper, a secret language. But for some, whispering wasn't enough. For some, their love was destined to become a roar that would echo through history. Some stories of forbidden love were so powerful, so tragic, so earth-shatteringly defiant, they broke through the wall of silence. They became the stuff of legend, passed down in hushed tones around fireplaces, and sung by traveling minstrels in torchlit halls. These are the tales that have the power to break our hearts 900 years later, because they show us the absolute limit of what people will endure for love. Our first story is not just a romance. It's a collision of two of the most brilliant minds of their age. In the intellectual furnace of 12th century Paris, Peter Abelard was more than a teacher. He was a phenomenon, a rock star of philosophy. Students followed him from city to city, hanging on his every word as he skillfully and arrogantly dismantled the arguments of his own teachers. He was handsome, charismatic, and at the absolute peak of his intellectual power. And then he met Heloise. She was just a teenager, the niece of a powerful and respected church official, Canon Fulbert. But she was more than beautiful or well-connected. Fluent in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, she devoured philosophy with skill that stunned grown men. Bursting with pride but also concerned about his niece's unconventional genius, sought the greatest mind in Paris to be her private tutor. He invited Peter Abelard, the brightest flame in Europe, right next to the kindling. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Their lessons on Aristotle and Plato soon became something far more dangerous. They weren't just reading about love and passion. They were discovering it in the spark of each other's minds. In a world of marriages arranged between near strangers, they fell in love with each other's thoughts first. In his searingly honest autobiography, confessed that he had initially intended a simple seduction, but was instead utterly conquered by her intellect and spirit. He had never met a mind that could match his own, let alone a soul that seemed to complete it. Their secret love affair, conducted in the shadows of her uncle's library, inevitably led to a secret marriage and then a child. When the scandal could no longer be contained, Canon Fulbert's world crumbled. It wasn't just anger he felt. It was a profound public humiliation. The great church official had been made a fool of in his own home. He craved revenge as absolute and as symbolic as a shame. He bribed Abelard's own servant. He hired a group of thugs who broke into Abelard's room while he slept. The act they performed was a specific, calculated form of medieval justice. This wasn't just violence. The man who had used his masculine power to corrupt will be stripped of that power forever. The punishment was designed to end everything. It shattered Abelard's public career. It forced both him and Heloise to retreat from the world into the church. She a nun, separated forever by vows they did not want and walls they could not breach. The world had won. It had silenced them, but it only gave their love a new, immortal voice. From behind the cold stone of convent and monastery, they began to write. Their letters, which miraculously survive, are among the most beautiful and heart-wrenching documents ever written. They are not simple love notes. They are complex theological debates, searing psychological confessions, and profound affirmations of love that have been forced to evolve beyond the physical. Heloise's letters are astonishing in their honesty and courage. She rails against her fate, confessing that her heart is not with God. She famously wrote that she would rather be known as Abelard's whore than the Empress of Augustus. She argues that her love was pure because it was freely given, for him alone, not for wealth or status. Abelard's letters are filled with guilt and sorrow, but also an undying intellectual and spiritual connection to her. He became her long-distance spiritual director, her intellectual partner, her eternal soulmate. Their bodies were imprisoned, but their hearts and minds remained defiantly, transcendently free. Their love became stronger, purer, and more legendary in its impossibility than it ever could have been in freedom. It became a testament to a connection that no blade, no wall, and no law could ever truly sever. But what if you weren't a scholar forced into shadows? What if you were the most powerful woman in Europe, but your heart was the one territory you weren't allowed to rule? Meet Eleanor of Aquitaine, a woman who didn't just live in the 12th century, but who seemed to invent a new version of it. At just 15, she inherited the vast and wealthy Duchy of Aquitaine, making her the most eligible bride in Europe overnight. She was immediately married off to the pious, gentle, and utterly boring king, Louis VII of France. Theirs was a spectacular mismatch. He was a monk in a king's crown. She was a force of nature who wanted an equal partner in life and love. She even insisted on accompanying him on the Second Crusade, scandalizing the world by riding at the head of her own Aquitanian troops. After 15 years and 2 daughters, but no male heir to the French throne, Eleanor did the unthinkable. She didn't just wait for Louis to cast her aside. She had the marriage annulled. In an age when a divorced queen's life was effectively over, Eleanor walked away with her title, all her lands, and all her power intact. It was the greatest medieval power play imaginable. And then just 8 weeks later, she made an even bolder move. She married Henry Plantagenet, fiery Duke of Normandy, a man 11 years her junior, who was about to become King Henry II of England. This marriage instantly shifted the balance of power in Europe, making the English king the master of more French territory than the French king himself. It was a shocking political scandal, but for Eleanor, it was also a choice of the heart. She found her match, a man as ambitious, energetic, and intelligent as she was. They were a medieval power couple, their reign a whirlwind of political maneuvering, legal reform, and cultural flourishing. They had 8 children together, including 2 future kings of England, Richard the Lionheart and John of Magna Carta fame. But Eleanor didn't just support her husband, she shaped her world. During a period of separation from Henry, she established her own glittering court at Poitiers. She became the patron of a new, revolutionary idea. She gathered poets and troubadours who, for the first time, celebrated a love that was based not on duty or procreation, but on choice, devotion, and intense emotion. In the courts of love, noble women would debate romantic dilemmas and pass judgment on the behavior of knights. For the first time, women were being positioned as the arbiters of love, their desires and whims holding power over the strongest men in the land. It was a sophisticated game, but it was also a cultural revolution, and Eleanor was its queen. Their passionate marriage soured. Henry publicly took a mistress and tried to sideline Eleanor, excluding her and her son from power. Eleanor did not retreat into quiet sorrow. At the age of 51, she did what no queen had done before. She led her own sons in a full-scale armed rebellion against her husband. She chose her own power and dignity over the role of a wronged wife. The rebellion ultimately failed, and Henry, in a move that was both punishment and a testament to her power, she remained his captive for 16 long years. But he could never break her spirit, and in her late 60s and 70s, she essentially ruled England as regent while her beloved son, Richard the Lionheart, was off on crusade. Eleanor of Aquitaine's long, incredible life teaches us that the greatest love story isn't always about finding a partner. It's about refusing against all odds to let anyone else choose your destiny. Our final story is one you think you know. Its star-crossed lovers are the most famous in history. But Shakespeare didn't invent Romeo and Juliet. Their story was real, passed down through Italian chronicles for centuries, and the historical truth is even more devastating. In 13th century Verona, long before Shakespeare gave them the names Montague and Capulet, 2 rival political factions, the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, tore Italian cities apart with their bloody and relentless hatred. In the midst of this generational feud, a young nobleman named Mariotto and a beautiful girl named Giannazza fell desperately, impossibly in love. Their real story mirrors the framework of the play, but with the raw, unpolished edges of historical truth. Knowing their families would rather see them dead than together, they found a sympathetic friar who, sanctity of their love, married them in a secret ceremony. For a few precious months, they built a fragile world of stolen moments, meeting in hidden gardens and abandoned chapels, clinging to the hope that their love could somehow build a bridge over the chasm of their family's hate. Tragedy struck, not with a planned duel, but with the random, chaotic violence of streets. Mariotto was attacked by a group of Giannazza's kinsmen. In the ensuing fight, he accidentally killed a prominent member of her family. The punishment was swift, banishment from Verona under penalty of immediate execution if he ever returned. His world, and theirs, collapsed. Giannazza's family, completely unaware of her secret marriage and seeking to secure a new alliance, arranged for her to be wed to a wealthy nobleman she considered worse than death. She and the faithful friar concocted a dangerous, last-ditch plan, a powerful sleeping potion that would mimic the stillness of death. The plan was for Mariotto to be alerted, for him to rescue her from the family tomb, and for them to escape together to a new life far from the hatred of Verona. But in an age without instant communication, a single delayed message was a death sentence. The potion worked with terrifying perfection. Giannazza was declared dead. Her grieving family laid her out in her finest clothes in the cold stone of their ancestral tomb. But the friar's messenger, carrying the letter that explained everything, was waylaid by bandits on the road. The message never arrived. All Mariotto heard, from a traveling merchant, was the crushing, simple news. His beloved Giannazza, consumed by a grief so profound it eclipsed all fear, he disguised himself as a pilgrim, snuck back into the city that wanted him dead, and found his way to her tomb. Believing her to be lost and forever, he pulled lips one last time, and drank a vial of fast-acting poison, collapsing beside her. As the potion wore off, Giannazza woke from her deep sleep. The air was cold and silent, and the first thing she saw in the darkness was the body of her beloved, lifeless beside her. Recorded in the City Chronicles of Verona, states that in her unutterable grief, she refused all aid, refused to leave the tomb, and holding Mariotto in her arms, she simply stopped breathing, her heart broken beyond the body's capacity to endure. Their story, however, had one final, powerful chapter. When their secret marriage was discovered and the depth of their sacrifice was revealed, the two feuding families were so shattered by the waste of it all that they declared a formal truce. Their love and death achieved a peace that generations of hatred, politics, and violence never could. It became a legend, a cautionary tale, and a testament to a love that was quite literally stronger than death. A scholar tortured for his passion, a queen who ruled her own heart, two young lovers whose tragedy brought peace. These aren't just stories. They are the founding documents of a revolution, a quiet, patient, but unstoppable revolution of the heart. And this may be the most important thing we learn from them tonight. Nearly everything we now take for granted about romantic love, the very idea of a soulmate, the belief that love conquers all, the conviction that you should marry for passion, not for property, wasn't a given. It wasn't inherited from the ancient Greeks or Romans. It was fought for and won by these medieval rebels. They took the idea of love from a frivolous distraction or even a dangerous sin, and through their choices and their sacrifices, they elevated it into the highest human virtue. This was about so much more than just romance. This was the birth of the modern individual, the ultimate authority. If you have the right to choose your own partner against the wishes of your family, your church, and your class, what else do you have the right to choose? Your own beliefs? Your own political loyalties? The fight for the right to love became the philosophical foundation for the fight for all personal freedoms. It was the first, most intimate declaration of independence. This revolution didn't happen. It was spread by culture. The troubadours of southern France, often sponsored by powerful women like Eleanor of Aquitaine, took the real-life forbidden love stories happening in courts around them and turned them into a new and explosive form of literature. Songs and poems about knights who would betray their kings for a single glance from their beloved lady weren't just entertainment. They were propaganda for a new world order of the heart. Writers like Chrétien de Troyes gave us the legends of King Arthur, but his most enduring creations were the impossible loves of Lancelot and Guinevere, or Tristan and Isolde. In these tales, for the first time, the hero's greatest quest wasn't to slay a dragon, but to be worthy of his lady's love. His greatest strength wasn't his arm, but the depth of his heart. These stories presented forbidden love not as a weakness, but as a source of almost supernatural strength and nobility. And this literary revolution had immediate, practical consequences. We see it in the court records. The number of legal disputes over arranged marriages began to climb. Young people, armed with the language and ideals of these new romantic tales, started to refuse. They began to argue in court that a marriage without consent, without love, was not a true marriage in the eyes of God. Bishop Robert Grosseteste of Lincoln, England, wrote a furious letter in 1240. The young people of our time have been corrupted by frivolous French tales of passionate love. They teach them to value their own fleeting desires above the wisdom of their families and God's plan for their lives. They speak of this true love rather than a temptation to be overcome. What the good bishop saw as corruption, we now see as progress. He was witnessing the birth of the modern concept of individual rights. This new way of thinking forced theologians to reconsider everything. Thinkers like Peter Abelard, shaped by his own tragic love, began to argue that human love wasn't the opposite of divine love. The capacity to love another person so deeply, so selflessly, he argued, was evidence of the divine spark within the human soul. A person who could love passionately was more likely to understand God's infinite love. By the 14th and 15th centuries, these ideas were changing the legal system. The concept of marriage by consent, the idea that both partners must freely and enthusiastically agree to a marriage for it to be valid, became enshrined in church canon law. It was a monumental shift. It was a legal acknowledgement that the individual heart had rights that the family and state were bound to respect. The revolution created our literature. Dante's Divine Comedy is, at its core, a story about his lifelong, unrequited love for Beatrice. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales are filled with characters wrestling with the messy, glorious, and often forbidden realities of love and desire. It created our languages. As writers move away from Latin to express these urgent, personal emotions in the vernacular tongues of people, French, Italian, English, and German, it created a new world. The Renaissance, the Enlightenment, The very concept of a life guided by personal choice and a pursuit of happiness. All of it has its roots in the courage of medieval people who, without a political manifesto or a philosophical treatise, simply insisted that their hearts belonged to them. And that brings us back to the beginning, to us. Here, now, the world has changed utterly. The punishments are gone. The walls of class, church, and family are not the inescapable fortresses they once were. But the fundamental choice remains. In our own lives, every day we face it. The choice between a life that is safe, comfortable, and expected, and a life that is authentic, passionate, and true to the deepest callings of our own hearts. These medieval lovers, their voices reaching across centuries of dust and silence, are asking you a question. It's the most important question you will ever answer. What kind of love are you willing to fight for? What truth in your own heart is worth a risk? Their story is over. Yours is still being written. The ink is still wet on the page. Make it a brave one. They were told they couldn't love. So they loved with a passion that rewrote the rules of the world. They loved with a courage that still echoes in every true love song, in every story a heart that refused to be denied. They chose love. Always choose love.